believe in that inner voice, there are things within you that you know are true, that you know you should trust, and just trust them. Stick to your guns on that and just keep pursuing those things that are important to you.
Robert Steven Goldstein retired from his job as a healthcare information executive at age 56 and has been writing novels ever since. He joins me today on Uncorking a Story to discuss his writing career and latest novel, Gold's Hutch. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, Robert.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, Robert, I'm excited to have you here, and I'm curious, where does your story as an author begin?
My story as an author begins with my father and with an article from the Encyclopedia Britannica. So you see, when I was about 8 or 9, my father figured out that I had potential, that I was a gifted young writer. And this resonated with him, I suppose, because he always wanted to be a writer, but he never pursued it. So it was kind of a frustrating thing for him. So he anointed himself my editor. And what that entailed was that anytime I got an assignment in school to write a composition, an essay, a little story, I would have to present it to him when he got home from work. And the two of us would sit at the kitchen table, the little Formica kitchen table, and no one in the family could eat dinner until he had eviscerated my work. And he was ruthless. He would take a red pencil, and his interpretation of being a good editor was to cross out pretty much every sentence he encountered and rewrite it the way he would have written it. And along the way, say to me, "You're an idiot. You write like an idiot. This is idiot writing." And he would do that to everything that I did. And this went on for about 3 or 4 years. And as you can imagine, it was not a pleasant experience. So one day I got an idea, and the idea kind of blossomed because I had a couple of teachers who would assign compositions to be written in class, so my father couldn't get his hands on them. And these teachers gave me very high grades and told me I was a very gifted writer. So it occurred to me that maybe my father was not being fair. So one day, instead of coming straight home from school, I went to the public library. Now, this was in the late 1950s, early 1960s. So if you needed any kind of reference, you had to go to the library. There was no internet. So I found the Encyclopedia Britannica. I found an article that could very well have been on an assignment on a topic that some class had assigned for a composition. And I copied the article word for word. I went home. My father got home from work. He said, "Do you have a writing assignment?" And I said, "I do." And I brought in the piece I had copied word for word from the Encyclopedia Britannica. And we sat down at the Formica table. My family had to wait until he went through it before dinner. And he ruthlessly went through every line, crossed out pretty much every sentence, said, "This is idiot writing. You're an idiot. Why do you write like an idiot?" And I just calmly sat there. And when he finished, I said, "Are you finished?" He said, "Yeah, you can copy it over and submit it tomorrow." And I said, "Dad, I didn't write this. I copied this word for word from the Encyclopedia Britannica. And I thought I had him. In fact, I was sure I had him." So he paused a moment, he thought, and he said, "They're a bunch of idiots too. They don't know how to write either." So he saved face, but I think we came to kind of a tacit agreement at that point, because he never asked to see anything else I wrote. I never showed him anything else I wrote, and I was on my way as a writer in my own right.
You know, I wonder how much of his response to your writing was like almost a self-criticism, you know, where he's projecting something about himself onto your work. Did you ever give any thought to that, or why he may have been eviscerating you so much?
That's very perceptive and very incisive and compassionate on your part. I bet you're right. I know he was bitterly disappointed that he never pursued the things he wanted for himself, like being a writer, was probably first and foremost. And he was probably frustrated, and there were feelings of jealousy mixed with really wanting me to succeed and frustration. So, yeah, I think, Mike, I think you have something there.
Yeah. I mean, either way, it's still your fault, Robert. So as you were telling me that story, my head went to this movie Back to School with Rodney Dangerfield. It was from the 80s, one of his later movies. And, he's this older guy, successful businessman, goes back to school, to college, and he's got a writing assignment to do a paper on Kurt Vonnegut. And he hires Kurt Vonnegut to write the paper about him. And then he fails. He actually fails. I don't know. Your story about the Encyclopedia Britannica article kind of brought that out in me. But it seems like you didn't pursue writing as a career. I mean, in the bio I read, you went into the healthcare business, or at least the information business. Did you ever think about being a writer when you were younger?
Oh, I wanted very much to be a writer. When I was a senior in high school, I wrote a short story that won first prize in the National Scholastic Short Story Contest. In college, I majored in English literature and creative writing. It was right around the time I graduated college, probably that was 1973. I came across this article, a very sobering article. And the premise was, it asked the question, how many people in the United States make a living full-time writing fiction? And out of, I guess our population at that point was, I don't know what, 300 million people, something like that. And there were 75 people they found who made a living writing fiction. And they listed the names of the authors, and I recognized most of them. And it was clear that the kind of fiction they wrote, they were very talented writers, but the kind of fiction they wrote was not the kind of quirky, offbeat literary fiction that I wanted to write. And it became very clear to me that I was not going to make a living at writing fiction. And a lot of people who find themselves in that situation stay in academia. They become professors and write. And I just frankly, I had my fill of academics by the time I graduated college. I just didn't want to do that anymore. So I made a pact with myself. I was 22, and I said, I'm going to work as hard as I can, make as much money as I can, retire as early as I can, and write. And I didn't mention this to many people. I found that if I did mention it, people were pretty skeptical about that plan. They said you'll never make enough money to retire early enough. And even if you do, by that time, the fire to be a writer will have vacated your system, and it's just a bad plan. But I'm a very dogged and determined person. I proceed quietly, but very doggedly. And I did it. I retired when I was 56, and Goldust Hutch is my fifth novel.
All right. Well, that's a good segue into Goldust Hutch. What can you share with us about Goldust Hutch?
It's a dark psychological novel about secrets and deceit. It takes place in San Francisco. It involves 7 people, 3 couples and a single woman. And there's also a rabbit named Golda. And Golda plays a surprisingly integral part in the plot as well. And as you get to know the characters, I guess what you'll come to see is that Golda is the only one who's not hiding potentially dangerous secrets from the others.
Interesting. So it's a book about people who are hiding some truths about themselves, and
Yeah.
Like we all, I mean, it's something we could all relate to. I mean, I don't think, I don't know, maybe I'm divulging too much about myself, but we all keep a little bit of ourselves hidden for fear, perhaps, of what other people might really think of the people who we really are.
Yeah, and there are different thematic elements. Part of the book takes place in corporate San Francisco, uh, focusing primarily on middle to upper management in a big corporation. Uh, and this is right around Y2K, if you remember
Oh, I
that,
remember that well.
and all the stress leading up to Y2K culminations. Um, One of the characters is a person who was a funeral director, but now specializes in the restoration of seriously damaged bodies for public viewing, and has a real affinity for the dead. And there are a couple of other characters who secretly participate in San Francisco's underground BDSM community, and and these people work together and try to keep the secrets, their secrets or their spouse's secrets. And one character does discover another character's secret and tries to rope in a third character as secrets of his own, and the plot goes on from there.
Very a lot of weaving there. Did you have to do much exploration of the underground BD and S&M community in San Francisco to craft this story, Robert?
I was active in that community years ago. I would say for about 13 years, from my late 20s to my early 40s, I was an active participant. So I got to know it well, or at least know it as it existed right around Y2K. So I draw on my memories from that. For the mortuary science, I wrote a novel. My second novel years ago came out, and one of the reviews it got on Goodreads was just an incredibly funny and encouraging review. And I was curious about the person who wrote it. You know, as authors, you're cautioned not to interfere with people who write reviews of your novels, and certainly never threaten them or criticize them. But this was a wonderful review, and I was curious about whoever wrote it. And I did a little sleuthing, and it turned out that the woman was a mortician. And even though that novel had nothing to do with any of that, she and I sort of got to know each other a little bit through emails, and we're still in touch. And when I got the idea to have a character like this, she very graciously offered to help me with the research, and make sure that what I was writing was factually plausible.
Yeah. I mean, that is a fascinating business. I have a friend of mine from high school whose family was in that business.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, and it's just fascinating, just because there's the public face of it, right? The guy in the suit, at the funeral who's orchestrating everything, but then there's the behind the scenes. What happens? How do you prepare a body for a wake? And
Exactly.
it's really wild. I mean, it really is wild.
Yeah, I have a scene where the restoration involves a body of someone who was in an explosion and was dismembered and burned, and the family really wants a public viewing. And um, the the things that are done are really fascinating, and in some ways they border on carpentry, but in other ways they border on high art. You know, there's an art to the cosmetology of it. So it is fascinating. Did your friend ever mention that a dead body can kind of spring up and sit up on occasion?
He has not mentioned that to me, but I have heard that.
Yes, I knew some. I knew another person in the business who said that, like, on his first or second day, that happened, and he almost went running, screaming out of the room because nobody had told him that can happen. You know, it's muscles tightening and contracting, but uh, it reeked of chiller theater or
Oh,
something like
absolutely. I would have rethought my career at that point in time.
that.
You know what I'm curious about? Kind of, at in your mid 50s, you pivot to writing novels. How did you find writing your first one? So kind of take me on the journey of that first, manuscript turned novel, and what that experience was like and what you learned from it.
The first one was very different from all the subsequent novels I've written. And the reason for that is that first one was the novel that I wanted to write since I was in my 20s. So I had been thinking about it for about 30 years at that point. And I was good at my job in the corporate world. I started as a mail boy in 1974, making $500 a month, uh, which you could live on in those days in San Francisco, barely, but you could. And 35 years later, I was a vice president, running multi-billion-dollar projects. So along the way, there were lots of meetings to sit through. Um, and as a boy, I was an amateur magician, and I worshipped Harry Houdini. And Houdini had a saying. The saying was, "A magician is an actor playing the role of a magician." And I can't tell you how many meetings I was in, say, near the end of my career when I was a vice president, and I always felt as if I were an actor playing the role of a vice president. And in these boring meetings, I would be thinking not about what was going on in the meeting, but about that first novel I was going to write when I retired. So that novel was in my head. I didn't even have to write that novel in the proper sequence. I pretty much knew every scene that was going to be in it. So when I sat down to write, it was very different. It wasn't as if I was creating something new. I was sort of scribing down this thing that had been in my head and that I really, really wanted to get out. So that, in a way, made it easier, but it also didn't necessarily prepare me for what writing subsequent novels were going to be like when you're kind of making them up as you go along. So that was different.
Yeah, that first one, sometimes, lightning strikes, and things might happen fast, and you get a little bit of success, and then somehow, maybe you have a contract to write a second one, and then like that pressure is like, oh wow, nobody paid attention to my writing process for the first one because nobody expected me to do it, but now here I have like this pressure to get number two out. Did you feel that with the second book or no?
Um, my second novel that came out was actually the third one I wrote because I had written one that I couldn't find a publisher for. I did subsequently. So by the time that novel that is called my second novel came out, I had written two very serious novels, and I was just psychologically exhausted. I wanted to write another novel very much. I love writing, but I wrote a light comic novel, and that got picked up pretty quickly. And after that, the one that had been sitting around, I guess, got looked at a little more seriously because I had two out. Um, but what is interesting is how the passage of time enables you to look back on things and write about them with kind of a different perspective. So I talked a little bit about my corporate career, 35-year career. I have Goldust Huch is my fifth novel. It's been It's been about 17 years now since I left working in corporate America, but I have never written about it. And it's taken me this long to really have the perspective and the wisdom and the the subjectivity to not be overly hurt or angry or judgmental about what went on, and the ethics and morals, or more the lack of same, that I witnessed over and over and over. And I was able to write about them, I think, with sensitivity and getting into characters as real people. And similarly with the BDSM world, there have been BDSM novels. The Story of 9.5 Weeks, I guess, was technically a memoir, but and of course the 50 Shades phenomenon. But in all of those books, BDSM is sort of eroticized, made titillating and erotic, as sort of a thing in itself, and that's not what Goldis Hutch is presenting at all. In this novel, I wanted to write about otherwise ordinary people who have a sexual orientation that demands that they include power exchange in their sex, and the machinations and the secrecy that they have to go to keep this from the people they work with. Because unlike other sexual orientations that, at least in socio-political communities that are relatively progressive, are now accepted, the LGBT plus spectrum. People with an orientation about BDSM are not readily accepted, even in those groups. So they go through a lot to keep it secret. And I was writing about those otherwise ordinary people who have a secret that could be extraordinarily detrimental to their careers and personal lives.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's have you seen the movie recently, Baby Girl with Nicole Kidman?
No,
I think
I
it
like Nicole
touches
Kidman. So
she's wonderful in this movie. It's a great character study. But she plays a CEO of a large tech company, owner, founder, CEO, who has got this perfect family, this perfect, seemingly perfect marriage, wonderful husband, played by Antonio Banderas, who's wonderful in the film. But she's got this secret inside her, like she's never really told him what she wants from the physical side of their relationship, and it's and she finds somebody who knows what she wants and gives it to her. It's kind of a dark movie, but it's a good one. I would highly recommend it, because
I'll check it out.
I think it touches on a bit of what you're talking about. One of the things that I noticed in a theme running through a few of your books is sort of like an Eastern approach, or kind of Eastern spirituality, and I just was curious as to your interest in that subject matter.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that. That's another theme in this novel, and pretty much most of the novels I've written. Um, I have practiced yoga, meditation, and vegetarianism for well over 50 years now, so over half a century, and it's quite intrinsic to who I am. Um, what I can say about that is, I Western I was raised in a pretty traditional Jewish home. My mother's side were Orthodox, so there was some pressure to you know be observant and keep the laws. And I have to say, none of that, nor any other Western religion ever really resonated strongly with me. They were faith-based. The basis of it is faith in something, belief in something. And there are lots of rules and laws. And uh, I had a real spiritual yearning, but that didn't do it for me. And I don't feel negatively about it. For people who do practice those faith-based religions, if it works for them, if it makes them better people, that's great. And it's really great for them because they don't have to go elsewhere to try to find their spiritual path. But I had to. And for me, the aspect of the Eastern approach is that it's experiential rather than faith-based. So you don't have to believe in anything. The practice itself, the meditation, the yoga, I believe the vegetarianism in conjunction with it, opens you up to experience God or the cosmic reality, whatever it is you want to call it, and experience the reality and truthfulness of it. So rather than having to believe in it, you experience it and know it's there.
Yeah, I think so many Western faith-based practices are about looking. Part of it, I think, is looking inside, but also like the reward comes afterwards, right? The reward comes after you finish your time on this plane, if you will. Whereas it sounds like more of the Eastern philosophy is the reward is through the practice. You're learning, you're earning something through the practice, you're experiencing something through the practice.
I think you're right. I think there are people who take the Eastern approach too far in exactly the aspect you're talking about, and they they reach the conclusion that the material world, the physical body, is all an illusion, and the only thing that is reality is what you experience mystically. And I've tried to guard against that because it seems to me that at least in this current incarnation, you and I have both a spiritual reality and a physical material reality. And why not experience both of those? And as long as we're blessed enough to still have our material being, make the most of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think right now, we were talking off air. My father is 92 and he's sort of, I think, coming to the end of his physical reality. But I think his spiritual reality and his physical reality are at odds at the moment. Like one wants to go and one wants to stay, and there's a battle of wills happening down in Fort Lauderdale at the moment. So,
do you try to tell him it's okay to go if he's ready?
Yeah, I do, and my sister and brother and I were together with him, and that is something that we were advised to do when our mother was dying last summer, and we all did by her bedside, and she did. But he's just not he's not in the same shape she was in, but it's it also, like, you can't tell him to do anything, so he's very stubborn.
It reminds me of someone who thought the people at Encyclopedia Britannica were a bunch of idiots too.
Indeed. You were talking about sort of growing up when you were growing up and, kind of in school in the 50s. And I was doing the math. It sounds like you were in the college. Your college years were what, late 60s, early 70s?
Yes.
Were you in the Bay Area for that period of time?
No, I was born in Brooklyn and I went to school in upstate New York in Binghamton University.
Okay.
which at that time was first, when I first got there, was called Harper College, and then it became the State University of New York at Binghamton, and now it's Binghamton University.
Yeah. I'm just curious what it was like being in college during that time, that period of time in United States history, because there was a lot going on.
Well, the Vietnam War was going on, and we marched against it and demonstrated against it. Um, if when people ask me if I ever smoked marijuana, I generally say I only smoked marijuana once, but it was from 1968 to 1974. uh, that, I guess, marching against the war, playing a lot of music. Um, I was a creative writing major, but I really liked writing lyrics to songs and writing some tunes as well. We had little bands going on. It was kind of typical late '60s, long hair and pharmaceutical explorations and a lot of anti-establishment and anti-war sentiments.
No doubt. No doubt. Well, Robert, one of the ways I like to get to know my guests a little bit is through some pop culture questions. So I'm curious, when you were younger, I know you were doing a lot of writing that was being criticized, but did you like watching anything on TV, or did you have a favorite movie back in your childhood days?
Well, this kind of goes back to my sexual orientation, which from my youngest days I knew was something that other people would not be accepting of, and so I had a friend who who discovered that his father had these porno films on what did they use in those days? 16 millimeter.
Yeah, 16 millimeter tapes. Yeah.
Yeah, so both his parents worked, so he could sneak his friends in. So I and a bunch of other boys would be snuck into the house, and he'd play these silent porno films on his father's projector. And I remember finding them just the most utterly boring things I had ever seen, just redundant people having sex. And it didn't do a thing for me, but I knew that as a boy in good standing in the community of boys, I had to pretend that I was as into that as everybody else. But you show me an episode of Superman where Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen were bound and gagged, and then my nether regions were percolating. So
Who knew Superman could be so hot?
right, Superman, Sky King, old gladiator movies. I guess you find things where you can find them, and what's interesting to me looking back is that no matter how young I was, I always knew that I had to keep that secret. I didn't even have to have a bad experience learning that. I just knew it sort of intuitively. So I also was very into musical theater. For a while, I thought I'd want to write for the musical theater. And so I lived in Brooklyn, so I was very close to Manhattan where the musicals were. So I saw a lot of musicals. I listened to a lot of musical theater music. And really, it wasn't until I got to college that my roommate and other people exposed me to all the rock music I had been missing. And that's when I discovered Bob Dylan and the Beatles, and said, "Oh, there's good stuff here too." And so I was interested in that sort of thing. I read a lot as a kid. John Steinbeck was probably the first serious writer who really resonated powerfully with me. But I also read a lot of Edgar Allan Poe, and later on, a somewhat more contemporary writer who wrote mostly in the 1940s and 50s named Gerald Kirsch, who wrote in the Edgar Allan Poe style. And I had mentioned that I won first prize in a short story contest when I was a senior in high school, and that story was written in the style of Edgar Allan Poe and Gerald Kirsch. And years later, I got a phone call that there were these two struggling screenwriters in Hollywood, and they had been working for years doing odd jobs on the side, trying to get a screenplay accepted, and they finally did. And the producer was very excited about it, and he called them into his office, and they said, "Okay, we're producing this. What's your next project? What do you have percolating?" And these two guys had nothing percolating. They had no answer. One of these guys had read that short story I wrote when I was in high school, and he pitched it. And the producer said, "That's a great idea." And and the producer said, "You have the rights to this." And they lied, and they said, "Oh yeah, of course." And all he knew was that it was published in Scholastic magazine, and he found out that a kid named Robert Steven Goldstein had written it, and he started trying to find me. He knew I lived in Brooklyn at that time, so he wrote letters to every Goldstein in Brooklyn.
Probably one or two.
It's like Smith or Jones anywhere else. It's just pages in the phone book. And my father actually got one of these letters, and he called me at work. I was vice president at that time, and he never called. I saw his number come up on the display, and I thought, "Oh God, somebody die or something?" And he said, "Somebody's looking for you. They say they want to sign a movie contract." And I said it had to be a joke, but he gave me the number. We got in touch, and it turned out a really nice fellow. They did write a screen adaptation. It actually got picked up by a production studio, but the studio went under before they could produce it, so never went anywhere. But that fellow and I are still in touch, and he writes blurbs for every novel I produce now. So.
Well, that's a very cool story. That's a very cool story. And as we wrap up here, Robin, I'm curious if you could go back in time and whisper some words of advice to that younger Robert who was getting his writing samples all red penciled up back in your younger days. What would you tell your younger self?
I would say believe in that inner voice. Listen to if there are things within you that are true, that you should trust, and just trust them. No matter what anybody else says, you can. In fact, I think it's better to keep quiet about them and just go about your stuff unobtrusively. Don't squander your energy trying to convince other people, but stick to your guns on that and just keep pursuing those things that are important to you.
Very cool. And Robert, I imagine we've piqued the interest of some of our listeners here. Where could they learn more about you? Do you have a website or social media that you're active on?
I do. RobertStevenGoldstein.com. From there you can find all my books and anything you wanted to or didn't want to know about me.
Well, I will put that link in our show notes as well as a link to the book. Robert, and I will say thank you for stopping by Uncorking a Story and letting me uncork yours.
Oh, thank you, Mike. It was a great pleasure, and I appreciate it very much.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlin uncork a new story.